Hello everybody, welcome to the Boxing Science Podcast. This is episode 62, where I'm going to be answering your questions about a range of different subjects in strength and conditioning and sports science in boxing and combat sports. Due to the recent growth and popularity of these Q&A sessions, we've decided to be posting this on YouTube and on podcast platforms every single Wednesday. So we're going to be answering your questions about a range of different subjects every single Wednesday. So if you're not a subscriber yet, hit that subscribe button so don't miss out on any future content. And if you're wanting your questions being answered on the podcast, leave them in the comment box below or on the community tab. So let's get on with this week's episode. So the first question is from Niall. Do many boxers take a break or train at maintenance between fights? And what is your opinion on this? Is there psychological benefit around boxers taking a break, or do they need to just keep up in terms of their physical fitness? Very much a strength and conditioning cop-out answer. It depends on the athlete based off the level that they're at. If they're at a very high level, what is the activity levels during a fighting season? Championship level fighters only fight 2 or 3 times a year. They might be able to have a longer break. And also for championship level fights, the training camp is more intense. The strength and conditioning is more advanced. The high intensity conditions more advanced. The sparring intensity is greater as well. And this might mean that they reach a peak, which often is met with a physical and psychological decline after that peak. And also they might pick up like niggles, injuries during training camp. So for championship level fighters, I can see them having 3 to 4 weeks away from the gym. And then with professional or amateur boxers, they need to be in the gym more or less straight after a fight. With professional boxers that are, at the moment, if they're boxing 4 or 5 times a year, I encourage them to have a week of total deload and then get back into the gym. You've got to be quite cautious in terms of like having these breaks. Like I said, like one of the biggest mistakes in professional boxing in a previous episode was that they have too long breaks in between training camp. When they have that too long a break, we can see a deload in terms of training status and also an increase in body mass. And then when they go back into training camp, that spike in training load might be actually detrimental. The more time that you have off from training, that spike in training load is going to be more impactful and can lead to illness and injuries. This is why you see a lot of professional sports now, they don't stop training. A lot of professional athletes don't stop training, especially like in football. You see on social media now, professional footballers at the highest level employing private chefs, private S&C coaches. When they have a week off or in the off season, they go out to places like Dubai and Mykonos and they're making sure that they're keeping that training load ticking along. And it's really important for professional football at the moment is because that training load and intensity is so high. If they break off from it totally, that spike back in training load is going to be too significant and this can risk injuries. And likewise in boxing, if you have a big deload and then an athlete has been eating what they want and not really training that much, and then they go back into the gym, this is going to be a risk of injury. So I can see why boxers would want to have that time off physically, but also psychologically as well. Is it really intense being in training camp day in, day out, not being able to eat what you want, training 2 or 3 times a day? They need that kind of mental reset. So I say like for younger fighters, professionals, a week off or maybe 2 weeks off max, but then championship level fighters, 3 to 4 weeks off and then start kicking on again. But there is an argument for both, but essentially you've got to look after the human being, but also the athlete at the same time. And that they're conversations that you can have with an athlete. It's all dependent on what level that they are and how active that they're going to be across a boxing season. Okay, so the next question is how to train boxers with hypermobile joints. Now, this is not an issue that I've come across too often because most boxers have restricted mobility and movement issues. But if I'm training somebody with hypermobile joints, I'd be primarily looking to control the eccentric, because one of the key things is to, when you're throwing a punch, is to have that stiffness at that end range. And if we've got somebody that's hypermobile and unable to decelerate, that's when you're going to end up getting injuries around the shoulders and around the upper limb as well. Doing some eccentrics to control that deceleration, doing some isometrics to improve tendon strength. The only ever time where I've trained an athlete that might sit into this category with hypermobile joints, I had an athlete that basically the shoulder kept dislocating all the time. So just creating some stability around that shoulder joint. Most common where you've got athletes that are unstable around the joints or unstable around the shoulders, I'll be looking to do more isometric work, doing some more eccentric work, doing more stability work as well around that shoulder, whether that is a kettlebell bottoms up press or working on the wall in terms of like reacting with a medicine ball or doing a Swiss ball figure of 8, something like that to create some stability around the shoulders. And that's probably what you'd see, like anybody that's listening to this and thinking, I don't train anybody with hypermobile joints. We've got people with like stability issues. So creating that stability, creating that strength through eccentrics and through isometrics as well. Punch iso hold, really beneficial with any athlete that's finding like unstable shoulders. This can really transfer to improving their stability, especially in a boxing specific environment as well. So yeah, there are a few different ways that I train somebody hypermobile or people with stability issues. Okay, got a question from Faris Lakovic, quite a specific one. As someone who usually doesn't have more than 3 to 4 weeks notice before securing fight dates, would it not be possible to your 12 on, 48 seconds off twice a week and 30-second max out sprints twice a week to get both adaptations? I understand that recovery needs to be a priority in this case as the risk of overtraining increases, but should it be possible to improve on both abilities to get adaptations from both sessions? Is this correct? Can you train 12 seconds on, 48 seconds off, which is muscle buffering capacity, and the 30-second max out sprints with 3 minutes recovery, which is improving peripheral adaptations? I'd say that you'd either want to focus on one or the other. And the reason why is because you need a certain amount of these training sessions to be able to create an adaptation. So it's not about how often that you do it a week, it's about how often that you do it before you see an adaptation. So for example, with peripheral adaptations, we're seeing over 9 to 12 sessions. And with muscle buffering adaptations, we're seeing that as little as 9 sessions, but most of the literature say above 12 sessions to 18 sessions. So if you're only doing 30-second max out sprints once or twice a week, you're doing them 30-second max out sprints throughout training camp. So we do the sprint interval training sessions in a very short and condensed block and just primarily focusing on them. And then we move on to something like muscle buffering. Again, sending the body a very clear and direct signal to create an adaptation from. Also, with 30-second max out sprints, that this can be quite depleting if you're trying to stay on weight during this time as well. Your energy availability will be less, so your performance during the sprint interval training will be reduced. So that's the reason why I wouldn't do it there. And also, you're going to be doing a lot of sparring as well because you're going towards competition. Then 30-second max out sprints, it's going to take a lot out of you. So you want to make sure that you're doing these 30-second max out sprints away from competition because you're going to be a little bit heavier, stronger, be able to get more adaptations from it, but also it's not going to be a detriment to your boxing training. So I would do, if you're working constantly in 3 to 4 week blocks, repeated sprint training, 12 seconds on, 48 seconds off, and different variations of this. So we do, for muscle buffering capacity, we do range different sessions. We'll do 2 minutes on, 2 minutes off, and mostly do this on the treadmill, on the curve. 1 minute on, 2 minute off intervals as well. This can also be done on the air bike. And then also we've got our 1 minute gears session, which is 1 minute put into 3 different sections where we've got 30 seconds at about a 7 out of 10, 20 seconds at an 8 out of 10, and then we've got a max out effort to finish. And with these spikes in intensity, this spikes muscular acidosis, which can work on muscle buffering capacity. And you're only working between 5 and 7 reps on this. So 1 minute on of this increased intensity with 3 minutes total recovery and repeating this 5 to 7 reps. Primarily look for muscle buffering adaptations, but changing the type of conditioning tool that you'd use. I'd also look at like doing like some sort of pyramid conditioning as well. So this is where we do every minute on the minute and changing the work to rest ratios, because this works muscle buffering capacity, but can also work on some red zone adaptations as well. So there's a range of things that you can do, but I'll keep it like short and sweet, working towards muscle buffering capacity, working on some pyramids, working on different ranges, different types of muscle buffering adaptations, because this is what's probably going to help you be able to peak more often throughout a boxing season. So got a question, a really good one and detailed question from Cremidis773. This question isn't for boxing specifically, but I know that you work with MMA fighters like Paul Craig. Merab Dvalishvili has arguably the best cardio in the entire of the UFC and has said he doesn't sprint. He only does long runs and pushes his sport-specific MMA training. Do you think that it's all genetics and people shouldn't follow this approach, or is there something to it? I'm not too familiar with Merab's training. He's a really good fighter, does like longer runs and like say some MMA training. Now with the testing that we've done with MMA fighters, they're very different to boxers because boxers are more aerobic base and really struggle when it gets to high lactate. Whereas like MMA athletes want to use lactate more anaerobic base. They can tolerate it a lot more. They need to work at these like high lactates during their conditioning. They're doing a lot of this in their MMA training. So if they're doing circuits, they're doing grappling, they're getting a lot of their conditioning quite naturally through this. There's a lot of boxers that naturally get fit just from their own boxing. They don't really do much running, or they do long steady runs, or they're just naturally fit. And like each boxer that comes in and each athlete that comes in presents a very different profile in terms of what their strengths and areas of improvement are from a strength, power and speed perspective, but also from a conditioning perspective as well. And their physiology, they feel like they can get away with not sprinting and stuff like that, but then they find out a lot more when they do the lactate profile. So I've had athletes that feel like they're fit and they can keep going and going, but they don't really have that ability to go through the gears. That's where some specific conditioning comes in, some sprint interval training, some muscle buffing capacity work, and it kind of unlocks that fitness. I've seen like many like boxers that haven't engaged with high intensity interval training because they are so skilled. They look fit all the time because they're able to dictate the pace as much as they can. Like somebody like Tyson Fury would be a fantastic example. Hardly ever see him blow in a fight, except from in the Usyk 1 fight. Obviously he had that bad 9th round, but it's because Usyk was working in bursts and keeping him under pressure, making him work at a higher intensity than what he normally does. That's the reason why he looked fatigued. But in other fights where he hasn't really looked fatigued because he's been able to control it with his height, with his range, with his masterful boxing as well. And you see like a lot of fighters that are like this, that are just able to dictate the pace. Floyd Mayweather, for example, we talked about this on a podcast just the other week where we talked about how Floyd Mayweather was so fit because he was able to just dictate the pace. Using his jab, using his defense, he was able to control his opponent to work at a pace that he was comfortable at. So with that being said about Merab, it's like he might have the best cardio because he's technically a better fighter against a tougher fighter where the pace isn't as controlled. That's where that sprint interval training, that muscle buffing capacity can come in when you're having to work through the gears and you have to work a little bit harder than what you used to. Some fighters can get away with it just due to their technical abilities, but I'd say that having a detailed understanding about an individual's physiology is really important to help unlock their potential. So I've got a question from probably the best YouTube handle out there, love_boxing science. Appreciate the support. What can I do if I can't maintain a high speed during 30-second max out sprints? First of all, it's tough to do 30-second max out sprints. So to get a good understanding and a perspective of what you should be hitting your maximum intensity, your maximum power output, and keeping it above 60%. So for example, easiest example to use, if you're at 1,000 watts, you got to keep it above 600 watts. So we've done this session with a range of different athletes for many years now, around about 10 years. We used it on the curve initially, back at Sheffield Hallam University. And then now we use it at the Airbike Boxing Science Performance Centre. What we've noticed with fighters is that each fighter is different and their physiology has a big impact on how they perform on these sprints. Some athletes can hit really high power outputs, but unable to maintain it. And some fighters are actually not able to hit that power output, but like kind of grind along really good endurance, but haven't got that fast twitch nature to be able to produce that peak power. To get a better understanding about an athlete's physiology, we've integrated this into our testing battery where they do a Wingate assessment, so a 30-second max out sprint, and we give them the targets to hit pound for pound based off our database of working with hundreds of fighters. And then we're then able to make some training recommendations based on what their trend looks like. So if we've got a fighter that is hitting really high power outputs but unable to maintain it, we would look to do cluster sets that might be 20 seconds on, 20 seconds off, and then 20 seconds on again. This is designed to get an athlete to maintain their speed at high speed for longer. And then in particular, this is really good with 10-second clusters. So this is where we do 3 10-second sprints with 10 seconds in between, and then we take the 3 minutes off. And this is really vital in increasing that intensity over the 30 seconds. If you've got an athlete that might be struggling to hit peak power output, might be just like doing 10 seconds on, 3 minutes off. So it sounds really easy, but we're encouraging that max output. We increase that, and then we can move on to the 30-second sprints. If you're struggling with the repeatability of it, so let's say the first set you hit 2,000 watts, and then the second sprint you're hitting 1,600, on the third sprint you're hitting 1,300 watts as your peak power, and you're seeing a massive decline in terms of your peak power output, maybe you could look at increased rest times. We've had to play about with this, especially with like really anaerobic athletes that are hitting high power outputs. We do like over 5-minute recoveries just to make sure that we're increasing that intensity across the 4 to 5 repetitions that we do. So a few different things that you can do. You can encourage athletes to do max sprints, 10 seconds on, 3 minutes off, cluster conditioning, the 20-second intervals or the 10-second intervals. And then also you can look to incorporate longer rest periods, maxing out at 5 minutes. Okay, got a question from Liam Daly, 99 on Instagram. Will there be a Train Like a Champion 5? The answer is yes. Hopefully it's going to be coming this summer. It's long overdue. Train Like a Champion 4 came out in 2021. So we're overdue, and this one is going to be the most advanced program to date. If you're a keen follower of Boxing Science and not tried out the Train Like a Champion programs as of yet, you can get access to this through our Train Like a Champion membership at just £19.99 per month. And also we've got our lifetime subscription as well, where you're going to be making a huge saving. You get access to our portal forever, and also get instant access to the full Train Like a Champion series. So go and check out, the links are in the description. And that brings us to the end of episode 62. So thank you very much for watching and listening to the Boxing Science podcast. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any future content. You want your questions answering on the Boxing Science podcast, leave some in the comment box below, or check out our community tab where you can leave your questions there to make sure you get your questions answered on the next episode of Boxing Science podcast. Thank you very much for watching or listening. Hopefully see you on the next episode.